The air in courtroom 3B of the High District Court hung heavy and still, thick with the weight of precedent and the scent of old paper files mixed faintly with lemon polish. Sunlight slanted through the tall, arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the beams and casting long shadows from the imposing oak judge's bench. Lawyers in impeccably tailored suits whispered in hushed tones. Clerks moved with silent efficiency, and a gallery filled with anxious faces watched the proceedings with rapt attention. Presiding over this solemn theatre was Judge Harrison Maxwell, a man whose silver hair, patrician features, and perpetually stern expression seemed carved from the same granite as the courthouse steps. Known for his sharp intellect, sharper tongue, and absolute intolerance for anything less than perfect courtroom decorum, he ran his court with an iron gavel. Today, his gaze, like a hawk scouting prey, swept across the room and landed on a figure seated quietly at the back of the defense counsel's table, Evelyn Reed. Evelyn, or Evie as she preferred in less formal settings, appeared utterly unremarkable. She wore a plain charcoal grey skirt suit that, while clean, looked inexpensive and slightly dated. Her brown hair was pulled back into a simple, functional bun, secured with plain pins. Sensible, low-heeled pumps rested flat on the floor. Behind nondescript wire-rimmed glasses, her green eyes were observant but downcast, scanning through a sheaf of papers held in a worn standard-issue legal folder rather than an expensive leather briefcase. At 40, she looked less like a seasoned attorney and more like an overworked paralegal, or perhaps even a slightly bewildered intern who had somehow ended up at the wrong table in a high-stakes corporate malfeasance trial. The lead defense counsel, a younger, visibly stressed lawyer named Ben Carter, was currently fumbling through his notes, clearly struggling under the weight of the opposing counsel's relentless assault. Judge Maxwell's impatience was growing visibly, his fingers drumming softly on the bench. His gaze flicked again towards Evie, lingering this time with open disapproval. He cleared his throat, the sound amplified by the courtroom microphone, causing everyone, including the flustered Ben Carter, to look up. "Counsel," Judge Maxwell addressed Ben, but his eyes remained fixed on Evie. "Is your associate prepared to contribute anything beyond diligently reviewing what appears to be the lunch menu?" A ripple of stifled snickers went through the opposing counsel's side, led by the renowned corporate litigator Alistair Finch, whose smirk was barely concealed. Evie looked up, startled, her cheeks flushing slightly. Before she could respond or Ben could defend her presence, the judge continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Madam," he addressed Evie directly now, "this is a federal courtroom, not a library reading room. We expect counsel to be alert, engaged, and frankly dressed in a manner befitting the gravity of these proceedings. That suit looks like it was borrowed from the court archives, circa 1985. More subdued laughter echoed quietly. Evie's flush deepened, but she simply lowered her gaze back to her papers, her expression becoming carefully neutral. The judge sniffed dismissively. "See that she remains attentive, Mr. Carter, or have her wait outside." He waved a hand, turning his attention back to the faltering defense, leaving Evie marked by public scorn, dismissed as insignificant, based entirely on her quiet demeanor and simple appearance. The weight of the courtroom's judgment settled upon her, heavy and unwelcome. The trial dragged on, with Ben Carter growing increasingly flustered under Alistair Finch's surgical cross-examination of their key witness. Finch, elegant and ruthless, moved like a panther, expertly cornering the witness, exposing inconsistencies and painting a damning picture for the jury. Ben objected weakly, fumbled his counter-arguments, and visibly wilted under Judge Maxwell's withering glares. The judge leaned forward again, his patience clearly exhausted. "Mr. Carter," he sighed, loud enough for the entire court to hear, "your witness is unraveling, your arguments are tenuous, and frankly, your ability to navigate this complex case appears questionable. Do you have anything substantive to offer before I consider Mr. Finch's motion for a summary judgment?" Ben Carter swallowed hard, shuffling papers desperately. He glanced back at Evie, his eyes filled with panic, almost pleading. It was clear he was drowning. Alistair Finch smirked again, already tasting victory. The gallery murmured, sensing the defense's collapse. Judge Maxwell picked up his gavel, preparing to make a ruling that would likely cripple the defense. It was at that precise moment that Evie Reed gently placed her papers down on the table. She stood up slowly, deliberately. Her posture, previously unassuming, seemed to straighten, aligning with an invisible plumb line of authority. The worn folder remained on the table. Her hands rested lightly at her sides. The courtroom quieted slightly, puzzled by the paralegal's unexpected movement. Judge Maxwell frowned deeply. "Madam, unless you are formally addressing the court, which I assure you you are not qualified to do, please be seated immediately. Your colleague's ship is sinking. There's no need for you to go down with it." His tone was laced with final, dismissive contempt. Evie looked directly at the judge. The quiet deference was gone, replaced by a calm, unwavering focus in her green eyes. "Your Honor," she said, her voice startlingly clear and resonant, utterly different from the soft tones expected. It carried easily through the silent courtroom, commanding attention. "With all due respect, the ship is not sinking. It has merely encountered turbulent waters stirred by opposing counsels' selective interpretation of maritime law, specifically the precedent set in Global Shipping versus Aurelius Holdings, a case Mr. Finch seems to have conveniently overlooked in his otherwise thorough presentation." The courtroom went utterly silent. Jaws literally dropped. Ben Carter stared at Evie as if seeing her for the first time. Alistair Finch's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Judge Maxwell froze, his hand hovering over the gavel, his eyes narrowing in confusion and nascent shock. Who was this woman? And how did she know that obscure, complex ruling? Evie didn't wait for the judge's permission. She took a step forward, towards the lectern Ben Carter had effectively abandoned. Her movements were fluid, economical, radiating a quiet confidence that was utterly at odds with her simple appearance. "Furthermore, Your Honor," she continued, her voice gaining strength, weaving a complex legal tapestry with effortless precision. "Mr. Finch's reliance on the quarterly earnings reports fails to account for the legally mandated amortization schedules detailed in SEC Regulation SK, Item 303, which, when correctly applied, demonstrate not malfeasance, but prudent long-term investment strategy approved by the board, documented in Exhibits 34B through 37A, currently residing in Mr. Carter's disorganized briefcase, I believe." She gestured subtly towards Ben, who fumbled open his case and indeed found the referenced exhibits exactly where she indicated, looking utterly bewildered. Alistair Finch was now visibly pale, frantically whispering to his own associate, who was scrolling rapidly through a tablet. The specific regulation, the case law, she was citing chapter and verse from memory, dissecting Finch's meticulously constructed argument with the precision of a master surgeon. Judge Maxwell leaned forward, his earlier condescension completely forgotten, replaced by intense, almost unwilling fascination. "And who?" he interrupted, his voice strained. "Might you be, madam, to possess such intricate knowledge of this case and the relevant statutes?" Evie paused, turning her full attention back to the bench. The wire-rimmed glasses seemed to glint slightly under the courtroom lights. "My apologies for the lack of formal introduction earlier, Your Honor," she said, a hint of dry irony entering her tone for the first time. "My name is Evelyn Reed." She saw the flicker of non-recognition on the judge's face and continued calmly. "Though perhaps Mr. Finch might recall my work from the International Synthetics Antitrust litigation, or possibly the Peregrine Holdings intellectual property appeal, I believe he was on the losing side of both." Alistair Finch looked up sharply, his eyes widening in horrified realization. "Reed," he breathed, the name clicking into place. "Evelyn Reed, the ghost litigator? You're Evelyn Reed?" The hushed whisper rippled through the courtroom like wildfire. Evelyn Reed wasn't just an attorney, she was a legend. A near-mythical figure known for taking on impossible cases pro bono, or for minimal fees, working from obscure offices, deliberately avoiding the press and the usual trappings of high-powered law. She was renowned for her photographic memory, her encyclopedic knowledge of obscure law, and her uncanny ability to dismantle the most formidable opponents with quiet logic. She hadn't argued a case in open court under her own name in years, preferring to work behind the scenes, ghostwriting briefs, or advising other firms anonymously. Her simple attire wasn't due to lack of funds. It was a deliberate choice, part of her rejection of the industry's superficiality. Judge Maxwell stared at her, utterly speechless, his face a mixture of shock, disbelief, and rapidly dawning, profound embarrassment. He had mocked one of the sharpest legal minds in the country based on her clothes. The transformation in the courtroom was absolute. The snickers were replaced by awed silence. The gallery leaned forward, hanging on Evie's every word. Alistair Finch, visibly flustered, struggled to regain his composure, attempting a rebuttal that now sounded weak and poorly constructed against Evie's precise dismantling of his case. Judge Maxwell, after a moment of stunned paralysis, cleared his throat awkwardly. Ms. Reed, he stammered, correcting the title immediately, his face flushing slightly. Please, proceed with your argument. Evie inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the correction without fanfare, and continued. For the next hour she methodically, calmly and brilliantly laid out the defense. She cross-referenced complex financial data, cited international legal precedents, and even highlighted subtle nuances in witness testimony that everyone else, including the judge, had missed. She didn't raise her voice, didn't resort to theatrics, but her logical clarity and comprehensive knowledge were devastating. She systematically exposed the flaws in the plaintiff's case, not with aggression, but with irrefutable facts and impeccable legal reasoning. Ben Carter watched her, alternating between awe and relief, occasionally handing her documents from his now surprisingly organized briefcase when prompted. Alistair Finch objected several times, but Evie countered each objection smoothly, often citing the specific rule of evidence that permitted her line of questioning, leaving Finch increasingly frustrated and the judge grudgingly overruling him. By the time Evie concluded her argument, the plaintiff's case, once seemingly unassailable, lay in tatters. She simply gathered the few papers she had consulted, stacking them neatly back into her worn folder. The defense rests its preliminary arguments against the motion for summary judgment, Your Honor, she stated quietly. Judge Maxwell looked at her, then at the deflated Alistair Finch, then back at Evie. The stern mask was gone, replaced by a complex expression: shock, grudging admiration, and deep professional embarrassment. Ms. Reed, he said, his voice hoarse, your argument is compelling, extremely compelling. He paused, fiddling with his gavel. Motion for summary judgment is denied. This court will recess for lunch. He banged the gavel, the sound sharp but lacking its usual authority, and practically fled the bench towards his chambers, avoiding eye contact with anyone. As the courtroom buzzed with stunned whispers and the gallery began to file out, Alistair Finch approached the defense table. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a look of weary respect. Ms. Reed, he said, extending a hand. Evelyn, it has been too long. Your reputation, it seems, doesn't do you justice. Evie shook his hand briefly. Alistair, she acknowledged with a neutral nod. Your initial arguments were formidable, as always. It was a professional courtesy, nothing more. Ben Carter rushed over, effusive with gratitude. Ms. Reed, Evie, thank you. That was incredible. I had no idea. Evie cut him off gently. Focus on preparing for the afternoon session, Ben. Review exhibits 41 through 45. Mr. Finch will likely try to pivot to contractual interpretations next. She gave him a brief, encouraging smile, then picked up her simple folder. The lawyers who had smirked earlier now averted their gazes or offered hesitant, respectful nods as she passed. The clerks looked at her with newfound awe. She walked calmly towards the courtroom exit, her sensible shoes clicking softly on the floor. Outside the courtroom doors, a small cluster of reporters, having somehow gotten wind of the dramatic turn of events, rushed towards her. Ms. Reed, is it true you're the ghost litigator? Why the disguise? What does this mean for the trial? Evie simply held up a hand, stopping them politely but firmly. No comment, she said, her voice quiet but final. She slipped past them, ignoring their shouted questions, and headed towards the elevators, blending back into the anonymity of the courthouse corridors as easily as she had commanded the courtroom moments before. Her disguise wasn't about hiding. It was about focusing on what mattered: the law, the facts, the pursuit of justice, without the distracting noise of ego and expectation. Judge Maxwell might have mocked her simple appearance, but Evelyn Reed had just reminded everyone in that courtroom that true brilliance often comes in the most unassuming packages. The trial would continue, but the dynamics had irrevocably shifted, all thanks to the genius attorney who preferred substance over suits. The rest of the trial proceeded under a completely different atmosphere. Judge Maxwell treated Evelyn Reed with painstaking, almost deferential respect, listening intently to her arguments and ruling fairly on objections. Alistair Finch, though still a formidable opponent, fought with a newfound caution, clearly aware he was facing a master strategist. Ben Carter, guided by Evie's behind-the-scenes direction, as she preferred, presented the remainder of the defense case with growing confidence. Ultimately, the jury returned a verdict decisively in favor of the defense, a stunning reversal from the case's initial trajectory. The victory was attributed entirely to Evie's intervention. News of the ghost litigator's dramatic reappearance and the judge's initial blunder spread through legal circles like wildfire, though Evie herself vanished from the public eye as quickly as she had emerged. Judge Maxwell faced quiet embarrassment among his peers, developing a reputation for being slightly more cautious, perhaps even more courteous, especially towards less flamboyantly dressed counsel. Alistair Finch reportedly mentioned Evie Reed's name with grudging respect in subsequent lectures on trial strategy. Evie returned to her quiet life, continuing her work on complex cases behind the scenes, championing underdog clients, and meticulously managing the significant but discreet philanthropic foundation she funded anonymously. She still wore her simple suits and practical shoes, still carried her worn folder. Her brief, dramatic return to the courtroom spotlight hadn't changed her, but it served as a powerful reminder to a world often obsessed with appearances. Never underestimate the quiet ones. True genius doesn't need a spotlight. It illuminates from within, often when and where you least expect it. The judge had learned his lesson. The legal world was reminded of hers. If this story about hidden brilliance and the pitfalls of judging by appearance struck a chord, hit that like button. Share it with anyone who believes in substance over style, comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more narratives where the underestimated rise to the occasion. Thank you for watching.